Hey guys, Brownberry here. Welcome to the Brownberry Chronicles podcast. This is a podcast about making things. I talk a lot about knitting and sometimes talk about other creative arts like drawing, sewing, and all kinds of things that we can do with our hands. If you're here for the first time, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for checking me out. And if you are a subscribed viewer or a returning viewer, thanks so much for coming back. I have been traveling quite a lot the last few months, and if you've seen some of my previous episodes, you've been able to travel with me around the United States, in particular visiting some wonderful yarn stores and having a bit of a creative retreat. I was very fortunate that this spring and summer have been busy in a good way. Lots of work travel. I'm in sales, and so my job takes me to different places quite often, and some leisure travel, just to enjoy time with friends and with family. So feel free to check out some previous episodes to take some of those trips with me. In today's episode, I am doing kind of a project roundup. I realize that I've got quite a few things on the needles over here in my podcast basket, and I wanted to share some of those works in progress and finished objects with you. I also have some announcements and invitations for you to join me in some fun things coming up. So let's dive right into it. So I hope you've put yourself in a comfy position just to spend some time with me. Pull up a comfy chair, get into your creative spot. I'd like to start out by making a few announcements that I hope you'll find interesting. I want to say that if you're looking for other ways to connect with me, I am on Instagram as heyBrownBerry, and I'm also on Ravelry as just Brownberry. And I'm also on Periscope at heyBrownBerry and Twitter at heyBrownBerry. So if you use any of those social media platforms, feel free to connect with me there. I have a Ravelry group going, and it's getting more active all the time. Some good discussion and beautiful projects are being shared in the Brownberry Chronicles podcast Ravelry group. Feel free to join us over there. We've already had some knit-alongs and some really exciting things going on. Some prize giveaways and other things have been going on over there for the last several weeks. So feel free to become a member of the Brownberry Chronicles podcast Ravelry group. We'd love to have you. Speaking of the Ravelry group, that's one of the places that you'll find the event that I'm going to announce first, which is the SummerSchool MakeALong. I came up with the idea that a lot of us are working on crafts that maybe we've been doing for a long time, like knitting and crochet and sewing. And within those crafts, we often seek out new techniques, new ways of doing things. We kind of learn as we go in some cases because of a pattern that we're working on containing a technique we haven't tried before, or we might proactively look for something new and exciting and interesting to try. And I fully encourage that continuous learning. And so I wanted to connect with others who want to try new techniques or who happen to be working on something that's very different than what they normally do. So we're starting the SummerSchool MakeALong. That's going to run from July 15th to August 31st. And the guidelines are pretty simple. Between those dates, we'll be making things in any craft that appeals to you: knitting, sewing, weaving, crochet, painting. I can't even think of all the crafts. I know that there's a lot of you out there who dabble in different things. So the MakeALong is not specific to any craft. The main guideline is whatever project or projects you decide to work on during summer school, you would include in that project a technique that's new to you. Maybe it's a new cast on, maybe it's a new stitch pattern. It could be a new way of constructing a garment. There are so many ways to do the things that we do that I want to encourage you to bring your project to this MakeALong and have some fun doing it with us. You can use works in progress. So if you have something that you started before July 15th, but it does include a new to you technique, please join us. WIPs are welcome. And we will have prizes to encourage you that will be drawn from the finished objects thread in our Ravelry group. So in the Ravelry group, I'll set up a works in progress and chatter thread and a separate finished objects thread from which I will draw winners for multiple prizes, including yarn, patterns, stitch markers, maybe even some gift certificates. We have some wonderful sponsors that will be announced in the group. So check the Ravelry group for the hashtags and guidelines, but join us for the Summer School MakeALong, and let's learn together. Many of you in the US are experiencing, like we are, a fairly hot summer already. And here in Florida, where I live, the temperatures have already climbed into the high 90s from about a month and a half ago. It's full-on summer weather at this point. I will not let that deter me from working with the woolly fibers and knitting all the warm and cozy things. So I want to share with you some finished objects that have come off my needles recently. It's the summer of shawls over here. I just want to tell you, I don't know if anybody else has been bitten by the shawl bug, but from what I've seen on Instagram and Ravelry, I think you have been. I joined the Shawl Society, which is a group of knitters who are working on patterns by Helen Stewart, who is Curious Handmade on Ravelry and Instagram. In the Shawl Society, there are 6 patterns that are released, 1 per month for 6 months, and you prepay for that pattern package, and each month a shawl is released and you can decide if you want to knit it. And we are into the 2nd installment in the Shawl Society. And I've already finished the first installment, and I'm working on the 2nd. So I wanted to tell you guys a little bit more about those. The first shawl was called the Talisman Shawl, and here's mine. I'm going to stand up so you can see it better. So I'm not sure if the color will come through exactly for you. It's a very bright orange, which the camera sometimes has a hard time picking up the exact color, but it is as bright as it looks. This was installment number 1. It has a star stitch pattern included, a lace edging with a picot bind off, and otherwise a very nice drapey stockinette body. And I love it. I think this was the perfect start to the Shawl Society because it was inclusive in that it was not difficult to knit. It was very open to different yarn combinations, and Helen's patterns are exceptionally clear and well written. She's very specific in the pattern. Line by line instructions are available, charts are available for the lace, and written instructions. And she's very good about helping you to decide what yarns would be good to use, because you get that information as part of the preview for each pattern. And then within the pattern, she gives you information like what percentage of your yarn you would have used, assuming that you're following the yarn type and gauge that was recommended. So you can really plan out exactly what you'd like to use and give yourself a lot of options for each of these. Here's a picture of options from the pattern. So some folks used gradient yarns, like this one, where all the color work is really done potentially within just one skein of yarn that has gradient colorways, or variegated yarns that show really well in that stockinette body. Some folks did striping, plenty of options. Highly recommended the Talisman Shawl by Helen Stewart. It was a great way to start out because it got us all excited, and plenty of beautiful finished objects are available in the Curious Handmade group. My next finished objects are probably no surprise to those of you who've been with me for a while. More socks. I finished this pair of vanilla sort of plain stockinette stitch socks a few weeks ago out of one of my favorite yarns, Patton's Croy socks. So this yarn was gifted to me. You can see I beat the label up because these traveled with me all over the place. This yarn was gifted to me by Shelly, my very good friend, who is Ciao Lunabella. You'll see her in our Ravelry thread as one of the moderators, and she's also on Instagram. On Ravelry, she's Lunabella. On Instagram, she's Ciao Lunabella, and she gifted me this brown rose marl Patton's Croy sock yarn. I couldn't wait to cast it on, and I'm really glad that I did a vanilla pattern with this because the way the colors striped in these socks, I'm so happy with it. Just love them. I've been working on making socks that fit and that are easy to travel with. So I've done a few vanilla sort of stockinette stitch pattern socks now. I don't really mind about not matching the stripes and so on. It's just a comfort knit. It's like comfort food. You know it's going to be good. But I've been working on figuring out what needle size and what stitch count works best for me, because I'd love to be able to pick up a yarn, pick up some needles when I find a good combination, and just cast on and be able to knit straight through. I knit toe up so that I can knit the leg as long as I want or finish a ball of yarn. I tend to knit my socks pretty tall. And this pair has probably been the closest to fitting me perfectly of the 5 that I've knit this year. I cast on 60 stitches for these, and I used a slip stitch heel and gusset from the sockmatician, Nate, who had a great pattern, very inexpensive pattern on Ravelry for toe-up socks with a slip stitch gusset and heel. There's some good math in there, probably why he's called the sockmatician, that helps you figure out what would be the right fit for you according to your gauge and when to start the heel and so on. Very well written instructions, really clear, and also repeatable, because once you figured out your gauge, a lot of your numbers come straight out of that and can be put into a formula to help you knit the perfect size socks. So I feel like these are the closest to fitting me perfectly that I've done this year. They are still a little bit loose, and I actually think that has to do with my knitting tension. I think that 60 stitches is probably a reasonable cast on number for me, or a number of stitches around in the main body of the foot and the leg. But I'm going to try going down to 56 stitches on the same size needles that I've been using all along, which is typically about a size 2.5 to 3 millimeter, and see what happens at 56 stitches if I like that fit. And if that's too tight, then I'm just going to have to admit that I have to use the smaller needle sizes and knit with tinier needles. Those of you who knit with sock needles know that they are already sort of like toothpicks by comparison to most regular needle sizes, but it would be worth it for a good fit in my socks, which is what I'm after. So those are the 2 finished objects I wanted to share with you so far. Let's move on to works in progress. I have quite a few things that I'm working on. Since about 2 or 3 months ago, I've had at least 3 or 4 projects going at any one time. And that's about my limit before I start to get a little bit anxious and feel overwhelmed about the number of things that are not done. So usually by the time I hit 4 projects, I start to hone in on one and, cruise toward finishing it so that I can get it off the needles, because beyond 4 or so, I get very uncomfortable with my number of whips. I don't know how you guys feel about that. Let me know in the comments if that's something that you struggle with too, not having too many things on the needles at one time. I know there are folks that have no trouble with it, but I guess it's just a matter of preference. I like to knit and finish things as soon as possible, and I've just happened to cast on a lot of things lately that have taken a lot more knitting time. So I'm not a monogamous knitter by any stretch. I do like actually having more than one project to choose from, but because a lot of them have taken a lot of time, I have cast on a few new things, and now I've got about, I think, 3 or 4 things on the go. Back to the Shawl Society. I talked earlier about the talisman, which was number 1 in the Shawl Society group. I'm now working on shawl number 2, which was released at the very beginning of July, and it's called Amulet Shawl. I'll show you a picture of that pattern. So here's the cover photo for that pattern. As you can see, it's a triangular shaped shawl, and it has a few different sections in it. The main body is a pretty wide stretch of garter stitch. Love that. It gives you just some easy knitting to start off with right at the bat and some very simple increasing. And then there is an eyelet panel, a ribbed panel, and a lace panel. So there's something for everybody in there. And it makes for a beautiful fabric. And just in Helen's style, she gives you multiple options. Here's some different styling options for this single color version. But a second option in the pattern is to do a 2-color version. So you could stripe in a couple of coordinating yarns or do a high or a low contrast pairing of yarns. And then a third option for either one of those is that you can add beads. So it will be difficult to see based on my picture here, but in the eyelet section and the lace section, there's an option to place beads strategically within there that make beautiful little sparkly points. As a part of Summer School MakeALong, I am beading these shawls, and those will be some of my entries for the Summer School MakeALong. I have not done beaded knitting before with lace and these other kinds of construction methods, so it's new to me. The pattern is wonderfully written, as I mentioned, so I was able to go into it with confidence that I'd be able to get through it, and I'm going to show you my works in progress. It's difficult to show the shawl because it's one of my shawls is the large size in the pattern. There are 2 sizes, large and medium, and I haven't reached the end of a row, so I can't really stretch it out for you, and I don't have it on a very long cable on my interchangeable needles, but at least you'll be able to see the yarn. This yarn is Henry's Prime Alpaca. You can see the garter stitch section here. I've had this yarn in my stash for maybe close to 10 years or so, maybe a little less. It is buttery soft. And I'm knitting it on a size 6 4.0, a US 6 4.0 millimeter needle. And that's giving it a bit of an open fabric, not a very tight knit in the garter stitch, but I like that. I wasn't sure I would at first. I thought I might want a tighter gauge, but after I knit for a while, I really like it. It's going to have a nice drape. It's going to feel very warm and soft around the shoulders. I've chosen a large size for this version of the shawl, and I've also chosen to do the beading option. So I got a chance to go to the beading store. I haven't been to a bead store that's, you know, officially for jewelry makers and folks who do beading, and I had such a good time in there because it is a colorful place. So I went to Crystal Bead Institute, local to me, and picked out some beads for the shawl. So hopefully you guys can see that color. These are sort of a multicolor, they're Japanese seed beads, size 6, and they're a multicolored set of beads with pinks and purples and greens and blues within each bead. I had another pairing of yarns planned that would coordinate with that color, but once I found this alpaca in my stash, I thought, I bet those beads would show up well. And I finally got into a bead row in the eyelet section, so I can show you. There are my beads. I gotta tell you, beading takes time in your knitting. I'm actually using a crochet hook method. So that method is pushing a crochet hook through the bead and then using the tip of the crochet hook to pull the stitch that you're going to bead through that bead and putting the stitch back on the needle and then knitting it and continuing the pattern. So each time you need to put on a bead, it takes a little bit to maneuver through the bead and get the stitch back on. But yesterday I did it to a point where it became very rhythmic. And I just have to show off some of the bling that I've got on my shawl. I have some beautiful stitch markers here that Shelly made. and I've had these for a while, and I love them. Some pearls and crystals. And then I got inspired after loading up my shawl with stitch markers. I got inspired to try making some. So I just went to my stash of little jewelry bits and made, hopefully you guys can see that. Yeah, and made some stitch markers of my own. This one is a little scorpion. I'm a Scorpio. And just simple jump rings and beads as a progress marker, and to remind me that this is the front part of the shawl, because when you're doing all garter stitch, it's hard to tell that sometimes. So it's been fun to have all kinds of sparkly things on this work in progress. It makes it really a joy to pick up and knit. Oddly enough, when I started this particular work in progress, I had in mind a pairing of yarns to do a two-color version of this shawl. And I thought, when I found the alpaca, I'm going to do the solid. I really like the way the one-color shawl looks. I'm good to go. Well, for whatever reason, I blame yarn fumes. I randomly just cast on another amulet shawl. I cast on a second one within a few days of having started the first one. I think the yarn that I originally intended to use was literally calling to me from my stash, and I just couldn't resist it anymore, so I went with it. So I have another work in progress that is the same shawl pattern, only this time I'm making a two-color version using a variegated yarn. This yarn is by Knit One Crochet Two, and it's called Batiste. This is the hand-painted Batiste in the colorway Cowboy. It's got blues and browns and orange, a little bit of purple, and the blue is kind of denim-y, so it's even a little more dimensional than just a blue yarn. So hopefully you can see just the edging there and the shawl so far, and more bling. So I decided when I cast this on, I'm going to make a second one of these shawls, and I'm going to use that as a way to try some of the other methods. In my alpaca shawl, I was doing a yarn over increase method around a center stitch. And in this version, I'm using the pattern's recommended increase version, which is a lifted bar increase or a make one right, make one left increase on either side of the center stitch. I also decided for this version, I'm going to use two colors. So I'll be using Cowboy and Teal, both of the same brand, one solid, one variegated. I've just started with the teal in the eyelet section of this shawl because this one is going to be a size medium and the other is a size large. So I've changed up a few things within this second version, so I feel like I'm getting the most out of the pattern because I'm knitting different sizes, I'm using different increases, I'm using two colors of yarn instead of one, just getting the most out of this pattern that I can. And I'm really enjoying knitting with both of them. It is like having two different projects on the needles. I'm going to bead this second shawl as well. I wasn't sure about that at first. I thought maybe this one would have no beads since the other one has beads, but the call of the beads is very strong. These are my beads for shawl number 2. And you have to forgive me, you see I have a boo-boo there? I do CrossFit, and there's some gymnastics work that involves things like pull-ups, and I did a lot of them the other day and messed with my hands a little bit. Doesn't stop my knitting though. These beads will be used in my 2-color shawl. I chose them based on the accent color in the yarn. I cannot wait. I'm going to be on the bead row, I think, in 1 or 2 rows from now. And I'm excited about it because I think they're going to fit very well. With this yarn, this is what they'll be used in, the solid. I think it's going to go beautifully. I'm really excited about it. So that's all the knitting whips I'm going to show you for this episode. I like to keep these short, as you guys may know if you've been here before. I love to take a small break with you to chat knitting and making, and so I will have more whips to show you. I do have a couple other things on the needles, and I have another finished object to share in another episode, so that's to come. Just want to give a couple of shout outs. Shout out to Kim, who is Kim the Crafty Nomad on Instagram, and she has her own podcast called The Crafty Nomad because she says that when it comes to her making, she is all over the place. I want to give her a special shout out because she made this for me. And she also made one for each of my girls. It is an amazing quilted project bag. Super sturdy, perfect drawstring. Love the colors. I have a shawl in here. It's the perfect size for a shawl, a pair of socks that requires 2 balls of yarn. And I just wanted to say thank you so much, Kim, for gifting this to me and the stitch markers that came with it. My girls and I love them and we are using them. This has already been across the country with me. And I wanted to say thank you so much for your kindness in sending that to us. The work in progress that's in here, I'll share with you guys next time. Go ahead and check out Kim's podcast. Kim is the Crafty Nomad, and I think you'll really enjoy her podcast. She always shares different things that she's making. I also want to give a shout out to someone who I met at SQUAM. SQUAM is an art workshop retreat that you can hear more about in a previous episode, episode 13, I believe. I want to give a shout out to Colleen Atara, who made the cutout words that you saw earlier in the podcast. And I'm just sharing some of the ones that I chose when I purchased them from her at the SQUAM Art Fair. I chose gratitude as a reminder to always be grateful and keep my gratitude practice daily. I chose the word breathe, as my friend Nancy, who is Emerald Lane on Instagram, reminded me, just remember to breathe and be gentle to yourself. So that was a great souvenir and reminder of that. And I also chose create. This one is done out of cardboard instead of wood. And they're just daily reminders for me to focus on the things that bring me joy and make me feel at peace and help me to feel at peace. So thank you so much to Colleen Atara, who is an amazing artist who has beautiful things like this available at colleenatara.com, I believe. I'll link to her so you guys have her information. She also makes wonderful mixed media art greeting cards. She does this kind of lettering on a large scale, and she's got beautiful things to offer. I hope you'll check her out. Thank you, Colleen, for being so kind to me. It was wonderful meeting you and others at SQUAM and getting to bring home some lovely souvenirs. I think the last thing I'll share with you is a few of the other the other things I've made in the last little while, which are not knitting related. So if you were just here for the fiber content, feel free to bid me adieu, and you can stop here. The next thing I'm going to talk about will be some non-fiber related artistic things. One of the classes that I took at the Spring SQUAM Art Workshop and Retreat in New Hampshire was to learn how to do Zentangle, which is a meditative art of doodling, and how to make mandalas. Mandalas are repeat patterns, normally done in a circular fashion, also meant to be a meditative practice from my understanding of it, and just a way to be mindful and kind of center on something as you create. I hadn't done either Zentangle or mandala type drawing in any real way before. I've always loved to doodle and to draw. That's another one of the things that I've been doing more recently. And I've always loved color and symmetry and patterns. So I feel like I really took to that class, and I wanted to share with you guys some of the things that I made. We learned the methods of how to make specific marks that have actual names in the Zentangle practice. And then we learned how to do mandalas that were a bit more freeform. So I'm just going to share with you a page out of my sketchbook that contains a little bit of mixed media. I have acrylic painted background, a mandala that I made and then mounted on some of my scrapbook mounting paper, and then some torn up watercolor paper that I had painted, just some very free-form swirly techniques that I then tore into pieces to add. And then I just did some white gel pen drawing. Let's see if I can get that closer for you guys. Really enjoyed this method of drawing. Before SQUAM, I would never have thought that I could create something like this. I would have thought that my type A quest for perfectionism in some things would have made it very difficult for me to deal with something that was meant to be symmetrical that wasn't perfectly symmetrical. But I'm hooked on it. I've practiced it multiple times now. Different methods of starting, different types of paper, Some of them I've watercolored first and then gone over and drawn with micron pens. And some of them are pieces that I've done, and after the fact I came back and thought, I would like to put this on a page and border it and do some more embellishment. I was telling a friend that I showed the method of doing these mandalas, that for me a mandala has a few different elements. You start somewhere in the center, and then from that center point, you're usually doing one of three things. You're either going to extend out from the center in some way by making some line or marking, or you're going to connect different lines together with curves or straight lines or triangles, and then you're going to probably embellish. So adding extra marks, adding dots, all kinds of ways to create the mandala. So you're either extending, connecting, or embellishing on any of them. And I'm just going to share a couple more with you. I love using the darker backgrounds and white gel pens. Just love the contrast of that. This is, a rainy Saturday morning drawing. And it's not perfect. I've come to points where I go to make a corresponding marking on the other side and I don't have the same amount of space, or, something is just not quite perfect, and it really doesn't bother me because when I look at the finished product, I'm really happy with it. And the way I feel while doing it is so relaxing that it's worth it. It's worth it to just let it be. And as I said, you typically start in the center and then just extend out and go as far as you want, make it as large or as small as you want. So I highly recommend this mandala practice. If it's something you've seen before and you've been intimidated by the finished products you've seen, I want to encourage you, don't be intimidated. I had never done Zentangle before, and I learned the art of making a few different Zentangle marks. You can find lots of information about that online. I really got into it. I find that I love color and adding color. Sorry guys, try to get this easier for you to see. Watercolor paints in particular, because there's so much dimension to them and so many different combinations of things. You can go light, you can go dark, you can go over the watercolor with gel pens, some kind of monochromatic options. So a lot of these were just things that I started. I was saying that a lot of these are things that I started with no particular plan in mind, just a desire to spend some time creating. And, I get out my gel pens or my micron pens. These are the ones I like to use, the Sakura brand, and their jelly roll pens, and their different pen tip sizes give me a lot of options. And then sometimes it's the background paper that I find appealing, and I just wanted to be able to make markings on that. And mandalas come in different forms. They can be done with or without a lot of lines, with or without color. It's so many things that you can explore in doing this. If you haven't tried it, I encourage you to try it. It's just a great way to express yourself. So I hope you enjoyed that little review of my Zentangle and mandala making. I keep a lot of these things together in a sketchbook, and I've really enjoyed going back and looking at them and get inspired to make new ones all the time. Let me know if you do give it a shot, or if you already do it. Connect to me on Instagram or Twitter or somewhere that I can see what you're working on. So I think that'll wrap it up for today. Just wanted to share a little bit of a project roundup with you and let you know what I'm working on. Of course, I'm interested in what you're working on. So let me know. In our Ravelry group, the BrownBerry Chronicles podcast group, we have Show Me Your Works in Progress thread, and we love chatting about what people are working on over there. It's like a little support group as you're making your way through your projects. I did want to make one more announcement. Hopefully you've hung out with me until this point. I'm starting to collaborate on a joint knit-along with Chanel, who is Piper Nell. Her podcast is the Piper Nell Podcast. And Chanel is the host of the Piper Nell Podcast on YouTube. She's also Piper Nell on Instagram. We're going to collaborate and host a fall knit-along. Actually, it's a fall make-along, and we're calling it the Transitions Make-Along. So this is a teaser to let you know that towards the beginning of September 2016, Piper Nell and I will be collaborating on a make-along, and we want it to be huge. We want you to invite all your friends and to join us in the Transitions Make-Along. The loose guidelines that I'll share with you for now are that we want folks to join in making projects that either have leaves incorporated, so a lot of projects have lace leaves or leaf edging or a leaf theme, and as you know, in the US during fall or autumn time, in North America really, that's when the leaves change and there's a transition from one season to another. And the other theme is transitions, which we think could be well expressed through things like gradient yarns or multicolor yarns in a project, whether you're knitting or crocheting, or maybe even through fabric. We see a lot of people doing beautiful fabric dyeing and yarn dyeing. So if you are interested in joining us in the Transitions Make-Along, please watch this space and we'll give you more information. We'll also talk about it on the other social media platforms. Piper Nell and I will be hosting it in our podcast groups, and we hope you'll keep that in mind for the September timeframe, and maybe even check out the bundle that we've created with some pattern ideas. I will link to that in the show notes so that you can take a look at some of the Transitions Make-Along suggestions for patterns, or just to give you some inspiration for projects that would be great for that Make-Along. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. I hope you've had a wonderful week and that you've had plenty of time to create. Be well and come back and join me again another time. Connect with me online anytime. Subscribe to this podcast if you'd like to see a next episode. And in the meantime, bye-bye.